Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. It's Thursday, October 21st, 2021. Good morning, Sheila and Connie. Good morning, Gail. There's Diana. All right, glad to see everybody joining on today. We are going to be looking at Ezekiel Chapter 1. Good morning, Linda from Bartlett, Tennessee. Good to have you. I see over on the Near Churches page, Diana Lancaster is watching. Good to see you on there. If y'all have any questions or comments as we are going through the stream, as you know, use the comment section, and I will acknowledge them when I see them. Ezekiel Chapter 1. So we introduced the book yesterday, and we understand the time frame that we are in Babylonian captivity. And Ezekiel is contemporary with men like Daniel and Jeremiah, same period of time. We learn that Ezekiel's only mentioned by name twice in Scripture. He was married. His wife died during the captivity. And I would say his main message, as recorded in this book, is about individual accountability and responsibility before God. So the first couple of chapters, we have his commission. So we've still got some folks joining in. Give it just another couple of seconds here, and then we'll get started. All right. I tell you what, man, Ezekiel chapter 1 is, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but I'm going to use it. Ezekiel chapter 1 is interesting. There's no doubt about that. One of the features we see in some of the books of the Bible, and I would say like Ezekiel, Daniel, Zechariah, and the book of Revelation. All of these books, they're all written in a time frame, in a time period of difficulty, persecution. Primarily, I'm thinking of the book of Revelation when I use that designation, but of very challenging times for God's people. And one common thread that we see throughout these books written during historical times like that is this, what we call apocalyptic literature. Good morning, Miss Janie. Good to see you. Signs and symbols, and there's obviously something to that, because the settings are essentially the same in the sense of, good morning, Lyle, in the sense of times of difficulty and trouble for God's people. And so in those four books that I've just mentioned, again, Ezekiel, Daniel, Zechariah, and Revelation, the same type of language is used in each. And we even, like particularly when you get to the book of Revelation, you see an overlap of the language and the usage of the same signs and symbols and characters and things like this. So it's important to understand that when we look at the Bible, so people ask the question, well, do you take the Bible literally? And that's not the best. I don't like that question because, well, it depends. Is what genre of literature are you looking at? So do I take the commands of Jesus Christ literally? Well, sure. Now there are some times when he tells us to pluck out our eyes and cut off our hands. Well, are we going to take that literally? So just kind of saying that to kind of set the stage for some of the things that we're going to be reading here. Hey, Barry and Glenda, good to see you guys. We have to appreciate the different types of literature that we find within the pages of the Bible. So, for instance, on Sunday mornings here at Mammoth Spring, we're studying through Ezra and Nehemiah. We're looking at historical accounts of events that took place in the reconstruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and the reinstitution of the law and the feast and all of this. And those are literal events that were recorded. But then again, you get to a book like Ezekiel, and you read chapter 1, and we understand that Ezekiel is seeing a vision here, just like, John in the book of Revelation was sent a vision in signs and symbols. So the question of, well, do you take the Bible literally? There would be a lot of nuance to my answer to that question because, well, it's contextual, you might say. Anyway, Those books that are written like that, in times of distress, persecution, trouble, discouragement even, one common thread that they all have is the type of language that is used. And so we're going to see that throughout the book of Ezekiel. So here in chapter 1, the first 3 verses sets for us the historical context, which we did that a bit yesterday. It came to pass in the 30th year, and that's referring to Ezekiel's age. He was 30 years old. In the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Kibar. And again, the river Kibar was a canal, essentially. It was a man-made river, you might say, off of the Euphrates. That the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. So Ezekiel, again, it opens up just like the book of Revelation. The first 3 verses of Revelation set this same type of context for us. He saw visions of God on the 5th day of the month, which was in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity, which that started in 597. And we looked at that yesterday. You can go to 2 Kings 24 and 2 Chronicles 35 and 36 and read about that. So in the 5th year of that captivity, so we're looking at 592 BC. So Ezekiel was 25 years old when the captivity started, but now we're in the 5th year. So he's 30 years old when this is taking place. That the word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Kibar, and the hand of the Lord was upon him there. And so we're going to see this idea, the hand of the Lord being upon him, and it has to do with the revelation of God to Ezekiel. Good morning, Sheila. Sheila says, when visions were given like this, did the person receiving them understand what they were seeing? That's an excellent question, Sheila, and I guess what I would have to do with your question is, I guess I would turn you over to 1 Peter chapter 1 and verses 10 through 12, because Peter talks about that to some extent, that some of the things that those prophets saw, they didn't fully comprehend. Good morning, Brian. Yeah, I would say no, not all the time. So we sit down and we look at this and we dissect it in view of other passages of Scripture that are similar, that have similar, like, again, the book of Revelation, and we can come to an understanding. But Ezekiel couldn't turn over to the book of Revelation and say, okay, I see the parallels here, what could this possibly mean? So there has to be some diligent comparison, some good hermeneutics. You have to approach the Bible correctly, understanding, again, what type of literature we're dealing with here, what's the historical context, and all of that. So I would say no, they didn't fully understand everything that they saw, these visions and such. And again, 1 Peter 1, 10 through 12 addresses that subject. Okay, verse 4, and I'm not going to read all of these verses. Chapter 1 here is 28 verses long, but we're going to break some things down. And he sees a couple of different things here in this chapter. One thing he sees, and I was trying to think, hey, what's a good word to describe what this first thing is that he sees? He sees a whirlwind coming out of the north, a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself, brightness all around. But in the midst of that fire, he sees these living creatures with wings, different faces, wheels. And so there's a couple of different aspects of this vision that are written down here and described for us. Okay, so there are 4 living creatures. Well, that we could also look at Revelation chapter 4, because in the throne room of God, as John sees it, and I would say that gives us a little more insight to what Ezekiel's seeing here. Knowing what John saw helps us understand what Ezekiel saw. These 4 living creatures are the same creatures so far as I can tell, and they're always in the presence of God. But here, so the word that I was trying to figure out what would be the best word to use was like a almost like a cart that's below the throne of God, and God's on the throne. I don't know that cart's the best word to use, but it's the best I could come up with at the time, so that's what we'll go with. But he sees these 4 living creatures, and and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man, and each one had 4 faces, and each one had 4 wings. So I've got each of these little things underlined in my Bible so I can keep track of it, because frankly, it's a bit difficult to keep track of. He tells us that they had legs that are straight, but they have feet that are like calves' feet. So if you've seen the foot of a calf, you know what that's descriptive, a split hoof, you might say. They're sparkling with a collar of burnished bronze. They have hands under their wings, and they have these wings on their four sides. Each of the four had faces and wings. So now he's going to describe, this is like a square that he's seeing. We need to kind of understand that. 4 wings, they each had faces, they had hands underneath their wings, like on the side here, apparently. They had legs and feet. And as this creature, as this cart, that's the word I'm going to use, as it moved around, it moved in the direction that each face was looking as it moved, okay? I tell you, it's quite something. Well, here's the description of the faces. Each of these 4 beasts had a face of a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, verse 10 there. So there's each one is 4-sided, and on each side there's a different face. But again, knowing the contents of Revelation chapter 4, that these creatures, beasts as they're called, are in some fashion servants of God. And each of these faces, I think, represents something. Well, think about it. So, the face of a man, okay? Well, each of these creatures then, in some sense, is created in the image of God. An intelligent, moral being, perhaps. Well, then you have the face of a lion. Well, what's a lion? Well, it's a strong beast. It's what we often refer to as the king of the jungle, a carnivore, kind of like an apex predator, so powerful. Each one then has a face of an ox, which an ox is a beast of burden, we say, a beast of strength, and then an eagle. Now, an eagle, we're given a little bit of insight because you go to Ezekiel Chapter 17, and King Nebuchadnezzar is described as an eagle. So this would have the concept of royalty and power. And so if this is a cart, again, if you will, that transports the throne of God, it has all of these characteristics. I think what we're ultimately talking about is the nature of God himself and those who serve him in the heavenly places. And again, I'll just refer you to Revelation chapter 4. So each of these beasts have 4 faces, 4 wings, hands under their wings. And here's the 4 faces in verses 10 through 12. 2 of their wings reach out and touch each other, and 2 of the wings then cover their bodies. And again, there at verse 12, each one went straight forward. They went wherever the Spirit wanted to go, and they did not turn when they went. So if it's the face, if Ezekiel's looking at this object up in the sky and he sees the face of a man, well, it might be moving towards him. And then the face of a lion, well, it would be moving in that direction, and so on. And so what we're dealing with here is the omnipresence, the omnipotence, the omniscience of God himself. That he knows all, he sees all, he is over and involved in all. That's what we're dealing with here. But this is quite a spectacular vision. There's no question about that. This would be something that would stick with you. He then talks about the appearance of these living creatures. He describes what they look like, but then in verses 13 and 14, he says, well, their appearance is like burning coals of fire, torches going back and forth. So a very bright image. The fire was bright, and from the fire went out lightning. And so John in Revelation chapters 4 and 5 heard thunders and lightnings. You remember in Hebrews chapter 12 when the Hebrews author was talking about when they were at Mount Sinai, there was smoke and fire and thunder and lightnings on the mountain. This has to do with the presence of God. So I think one of the things we're dealing with here in Ezekiel chapter 1 is God revealing himself to his prophet saying, I am with you, I see you, I know what's going on. I think that's a big key, both here with Revelation, with Ezekiel, and also with the book of Revelation, as those early Christians were being persecuted by Rome. That's what we're talking about. Now in Ezekiel 1, beginning in verse 15, down through verse 21, he talks about how this thing, again, this cart, as I've described it, how it moves around. Well, it has a wheel on each side, but it's not just a singular wheel. There's a wheel within a wheel. This thing can move in any direction. Okay, we would say north, south, east, and west. It can go anywhere at any time. And again, this has to do with the omnipresence and the all-knowing character or nature of God. He knows and sees everything. He is everywhere all the time. That's what this description is. And so you have these four wheels. There's constant motion and observation by God. See, so we're in Babylon. Okay, remember that. And the Jews thought, well, God lives in Jerusalem in the temple. And that thought process kind of evolved over the years. You know, when Solomon built the temple, he said, the heaven of heavens cannot contain thee, how much less this house that I built. But over the years, they began to depend on that as the location. This is where God is. To Ezekiel and to the captives, God says, no, I am here. I'm with you. I'm with my people wherever they go. And so this thing, this cart can move and at any time in all directions, and it has sight all around. It has knowledge all around. This is descriptive of the character of God. Well, above this cart with the four wheels that can move in all directions, he sees a firmament, verse 22. And that Hebrew word firmament, I mean, you know, we run into that in Genesis chapter 1. That's the expanse. That's the heavens or the skies. Well, above these living creatures, verse 22, he describes the images that he sees there, the colors that he sees. It was awesome, he says. Crystal stretched out over their heads. Under their firmament, their wings spread out straight, one towards another. Each one had two which covered one side, and each one had two which covered the other side of the body. I mean, this is... I'm doing the best I can to explain this. It's hard to imagine what he sees here. But the word I used earlier was spectacular. Well, that's to say the least. Well, then he hears noise, the noise of their wings. It's like many waters. It's like the voice of the Almighty. And then you have above the firmament. So you've got the cart that moves in all directions, that sees everywhere. You've got the firmament. And then above the firmament, over their heads, was the likeness of a throne. This is God's throne. All right? In appearance like a sapphire stone, on the likeness of the throne was a likeness with the appearance of a man high above it. So pick up on these words. I'm reading from the New King James. Likeness is used many times, and he sees this as of a... That language is important, okay? He's seeing visions here. This is one of the ways in which God communicated with the prophets. Again, Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. I mentioned that verse a couple times yesterday. With these spectacular visions, you have the throne and then someone above the throne. From the appearance of his waist and upward, I saw as it were the color of amber with the appearance of fire all around. When you look at Revelation chapter 1, when it's discussing Christ and his appearance, remember he had eyes like as of fire, penetrating sight. He sees all. He knows all. And again, for the people in captivity, hundreds of miles from Jerusalem, the temple's been burned to the ground by Nebuchadnezzar. They need this. Ezekiel needs this. It's a message here. It's a vision, not a message. It's a vision of reassurance. From the appearance of his waist and downward, I saw as it were the appearance of fire with brightness all around, like the appearance of a rainbow in a cloud. Well, we see a rainbow around God's throne room in the book of Revelation. So again, that's what we're seeing here. The presence of God with his people, even in a foreign land under difficult circumstances. Well, what's a rainbow represent? The promises of God, the mercy of God. You know, I would say, all of you watching this video, it takes us back to the post-flood, doesn't it? When God put the bow in the cloud. So it's a reflection on God's character, his nature as a God who makes covenant and keeps covenant. Now the problem with Israel, and the reason they're in captivity right now, is because they had broken the covenant. Yeah, so Deborah, hope, that's right. That's the concept of a rainbow. And so there is hope in captivity, but they're going to have some responsibility to realize that hope. So you have the rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day. So was the appearance of the brightness all around it. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. So Ezekiel tells us right there, what are you seeing here? Well, it's the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. I mean, how would you describe, if you were able to see God, how could you possibly describe that with human words? We understand Ezekiel's writing by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, but he's communicating even to us today as we read it to humans with human words. So how would you describe the presence of God? Well, this is apparently a common way to do it, because Ezekiel does it, and then John does it about what? Just 650 years later or so. So when I saw it, the end of the chapter says, I fell on my face, and I heard a voice of one speaking. Well, that leads us obviously into chapter 2, which chapter 2 is his commission to prophesy to the captives. But before he begins his prophecy, his work as a prophet, you might say, he's given this vision of reassurance of the hope of God, as Deborah said, the mercy of God, the promises of God. See, one thing that God promised his people, I'm going to turn over just real quick, and we'll kind of wrap it up right here. Over in Jeremiah chapter 29, God had promised to his people, okay, you're going into captivity. He told them that. Jeremiah 29:5 says, build houses, dwell in them, plant gardens, eat fruit, get married, have children. You're going to be there for a while. And then Jeremiah 29 verse 10, for thus says the Lord, after 70 years are completed at Babylon, I will visit you and perform my good word towards you and cause you to return to this place. And of course, that's the books of Ezra and Nehemiah that record that. But to me, when you couple Jeremiah 29, the first several verses there, you see this concept of the rainbow of Ezekiel chapter 1 and verse, 27 or 28. Hope, mercy, promise, grace, the return from captivity. That's what Ezekiel's getting ready to, that's what Ezekiel's seeing, and then he's getting ready to start, as he has seen that reassurance of the presence of God. Now he's going to start prophesying. All right, guys. That's what I've got for Ezekiel chapter 1. I don't see any questions or comments further. Just all the greetings. Glad that all of you were here today. And of course, tomorrow's Friday, so we won't be back tomorrow. All right. Well, if there's no questions or comments, I'm going to shut it down. And I appreciate you all being here today. Thank you, Billy. I appreciate that. And I'm glad you're here. After the stream's over, if you think of anything, you have a question or comment, feel free to add it to the comment section, and I'll address it when I see it. If you have somebody who'd like to do these studies who doesn't do Facebook, send them to our YouTube channel, Mammoth Spring Church of Christ, and all of this content is uploaded there. All right, I guess that's it for the week, guys. Appreciate it. Michelle, thank you. Good to see you. Have a good day. And hopefully we will see you back here on the next live stream. Have a good weekend.